Welcome to Data Team Summit. Super excited to be here. I am joined by my name is Tarush Aggarwal. I'm the founder of 5X. Super excited to be joined by three people I've known very dearly in the data space. We have Max, CEO founder of Preset and also Airflow. We have Akhila, who I've had the pleasure of working with at WeWork. She's a staff data engineer leading the WeWork data team. And we have my good friend David, who is the CEO of Delphi, previously at Metaplane, and a big sort of contributor, sharing a lot of thought leadership in the data space in general. So we're super excited to be here. We're talking about we're doing a panel on a topic which is called Rise of the Data Generalist, really based on an article I wrote a few months ago, which is an evolution of Max's original paper, which was called Rise of the Data Engineer, which probably became, one of the landmark papers in data, talking about this new role of data engineering, which came to exist in like 2012, 2013. So Max, just to just to kick us off, would you want to just give us a brief introduction of yourself and what was Rise of the Data Engineer really based on?
Awesome. Yeah. So we were trying to remember when exactly I wrote the post, but I remember I was at Airbnb at the time. So that was like maybe 2018 or 19. I was coming out of Facebook. I was at Yahoo before. So I've been part of these very large data teams. And when I joined Facebook, I believe my title was like data warehouse engineer or something like that, or BI engineer. And then we started at some point calling ourselves internally data engineers. And when I joined Airbnb, I think they had not made that change, right? And I was like, no, I'm a data engineer. I'm not a data architect. I forgot what they call themselves. It was like ETL engineers. I was like, I don't want to be an ETL engineer. I want to be a data engineer. That fits so much better. And to a point where I was like, let me write a blog post. I was inspired by, I believe, someone at Facebook. I forgot who it is. I should have the quotation. Someone wrote The Rise of the Data Scientist early on. And I think like that's maybe 2010-ish, maybe a little bit before then. And that's a post that was super influential and kind of cemented a role. And we really saw that rise of the data scientists. I wanted to attempt to maybe do the same with the data engineering role. And some of the key points in the post was one big point was going from, say, drag and drop type tools like Informatica and tools like so Microsoft SQL Server integration services. We had all these like drag and drop tools for data transformation in the past, and then we started like shifting away from that and doing a lot of data transformation as code, a lot of data infrastructure as code. And then we felt like much more like software engineers than drag and droppers and people that were just doing drag and drop and specialized tools. So those were some of the high level ideas in there. I also wrote like a fast follow post called The Downfall of the Data Engineer, where I was like jaded and really upset with the role. I was like, oh, it sucks to be a data engineer, for a variety of reasons that I unpacked in this other post that I think is interesting and like more or less like still contemporary, even though like it's probably like 5 years old now too. I think like some of the challenges, the issues around the role of the data engineer still very much exist. So that's something we could get into too, or just like, I think it's really interesting to talk about the data generalist. That really, when I read your post, that really resonated with me, with the rise of AI, and especially like now I've been started a company about 5 years ago. So, in a smaller environment, everyone has to be a generalist. So that definitely resonated with me. So yeah. So those are the big ideas of this post.
Yeah. I think what's really interesting is all of us have been sort of data engineers, right? We all have played that role. We've all played that role. And, if you look at what kind of happened from 2013 to 2023, there've been just an explosion in general in this sort of data space. We've built all these different categories, and back in 2013, even back when I was at Salesforce, you didn't have mixed panel, you didn't have a warehouse, you didn't have DBT. And all of this has really come across in the last 10 years. And, a lot of what I was exploring is we've created all these different categories. And with some of these different categories, we've created different roles, like analytics engineer, obviously uh, became a thing with sort of DBT launching, and data scientists and data visualization engineers and data platform engineers. And we've created, BI engineers, and we've created all of these sort of different roles. And, something which is kind of really interesting, AI is sort of one advent, what automated ingestion did with, not having to go worry about that, things which are happening on the semantic layer and LLMs and, sort of fully managed platforms like 5x, which, all of a sudden sort of stitches together. There are a few different ones. Are we sort of taking a U-turn over here where all of a sudden you don't need to have a specialized role across each of these different areas, where, in the future, are we sort of going back to a data generalist, which can use a sophisticated partner ecosystem and really be able to we're moving to a small lean teams which can actually go do everything. So, Akhila, I know you are very much, leading, uh, a large organization, with a fairly sort of lean team. Sort of talk to us what you're seeing at, the WeWorks of the world, and, sort of what you're hearing in conversations with a lot of other data teams which you get to interact with.
Sure, yeah. So before I do that, I'd like to give some context on my own journey in the data engineering space. I actually started as a backend engineer out of school, building Java microservices for a fintech company, and then switched to data engineering because that was where my interests it was always in data. And then, I just remembered that my first project was to write parsers to connect CSVs and bring the data into an on-prem cloud where Hadoop was deployed. So that was my first experience with the data engineering platform. And from that, we have evolved into the modern data stack where nobody talks about Hadoop anymore. We work with cloud data warehouses like Snowflake. There's DBT in play, and we're using modern orchestration systems like Airflow. I still remember using AutoSys for like scheduling jobs. So all of this has happened like in the last 10 years. And one thing that has been consistent for me is the comparison between software engineering and data engineering. I've always felt that software engineering is, as a field, is a lot more structured. The roles are a lot more well defined. The job descriptions are also very well defined. But with data engineering, it's always been a bit of wild, wild west because things are evolving so rapidly. So my own experience, I've been data engineer, I've been a data analyst, and within WeWork, when I started at 2018, I was responsible for introducing DBT and also introducing Snowflake. And since then, my own skill set, I've had to learn a lot of things on the job. Obviously, you come in with like foundational skills like programming languages and basic design and architecture skills, but then I've also had to learn skills like whether we need to buy a tool or whether we need to build something in-house. Making these strategic and analytical decisions, like this is not something you learn in your first couple of jobs straight out of school. This is something you will learn as you grow in your career. So at WeWork today, we are a modern data stack shop, also one of the early adopters of DBT. And today I spend a lot of time looking at our data platform and trying to understand how much we are spending. Are we getting the ROI? And then is there room for switching one tool with another and POCing different tools? So these are all very different from my day-to-day, say a few years ago in my career.
Yeah, thank God for the death of Hadoop. We were done with that elephant. It was so hard to work with. It was so slow and painful. I think we are all ready for to move past that.
Yeah, I love the build or the buy sort of conversation. And like, to be honest, I don't see data teams building that much anymore. Like, I think it's either like buy or use open source, to be kind of very honest. What's the last time uh building any component of what can be called a category? You don't I haven't seen a company want to go build observability or go obviously not build BI, but even like data sort of modeling, it's like using one of the players or orchestration. David, I think this could be kind of a good segue. Like, you spend a lot of time talking about thought leadership in the data space. What's really the evolution of the build versus buy conversation, and how is that really also affecting what we're seeing in terms of the different job roles, as Akhila was sort of mentioning, with sort of different job descriptions?
Yeah, I'm definitely seeing, like, especially from when I first started my career, and like we didn't have any of these tools, and so I was just like hand rolling stuff. Like oftentimes, like my first role was like a business analyst role, and we didn't have Python or R, like that wasn't a thing back then. So what was I using? I was using like VBA to like write scripts to do my data engineering pipelines, and I didn't know I was doing data engineering at the time, but in hindsight, that's what I was doing. And like you'd have this cyclical process where you do data engineering at the start of the month, and then in the middle of the month you start doing some reporting, and at the end of the month you do your analytics. So I'd be like, you do full stack, but at different times, like because that's how it had to be. And that's so like it's completely changed now, because for every piece that you have of that stack or the activities that you used to do, there is now relatively mature tooling. Like, everyone's seen that picture of that Matt Turk makes of the data ecosystem. And, I keep joking that one day it's going to turn into his face, or each tool is a pixel, right? And, we have plenty of tools now. A lot of them are pretty well integrated. So I totally agree. I think teams are often buying or using open source. Where you see them like building their own, I think it's because, like, so when I was at List, we had our own like event like telemetry system. And the reason that was true was because back when List needed it, that there was only really like Snowplow out there that was open source. And it was much less mature than it is today. So they decided to build their own because then they could meet their own requirements. And that some of those legacy like systems that teams have built themselves persist to today, because they built them and built them and built them. And like you hear like of like Deliveroo built their own DBT alternative because back in 2018 DBT didn't do what they wanted it to do. And like that still persists today because it's a mature product inside their organization that they use. And I think that's where people are building rather than just building entirely new things. The only other kind of situations I'm seeing them building is where there's genuinely some novel or niche situation which no one's going to build, or build a tool to sell or open source either.
I heard an interesting take on the build versus buy on I think it was on the All In podcast. It's a very, very popular podcast. And I think it was David Sachs was talking about how the economics of build versus buy might be changing a lot with AI, with the rise of AI. So it's a lot cheaper to build things nowadays. Of course, you shouldn't build a scheduler. Don't do what I did, with Airflow. We have, there's a lot of things that you shouldn't build, especially when the problem is solved with open source. But for things that are close to your business logic, business rules, something that's really specific, maybe it's like something around the customer data warehouse, or like automation around customer communication and things like that. Like building your own thing maybe makes more sense in the age of AI, where it's cheaper and easier to build things quickly. I haven't really seen that as a trend, but logically it seems to make some sense.
I think that's really interesting, right? And I didn't even think of that, but I think with AI, helping you actually build or maybe even stitch together sort of different, elements to it, kind of going back to one of the things we wanted to explore today is like, I love what Akhila said about job descriptions, right? Like job descriptions haven't really been standardized in the last 5 years because the space was moving so differently. And like, you had a job description on a data engineer, and a few months later, you had to rename that to analytics engineer because you probably just had to kind of go keep up with the market, right? But, with being more sort of relative maturity, as David mentioned, and, these tools kind of work pretty well together now. Is it enough if you want to go join, the next sort of startup or even exploring into a bigger company? Is an analytics engineer skill set enough of I've done the Udemy course, I've done the Coursera course, I've done an internship at company XYZ? Is it enough to really go be a data analyst? Or as Akhila was talking about, what she signed up for compared to what she does is very different. Or is a data analyst or is a analytics engineer going to be vastly underskilled to go join a sort of data team today?
I think we should start with defining what you mean by analytics engineer. And I'm sure we are going to get different descriptions of it.
I mean, at the very, very simplest, right? Someone, building models on, the DBT type world and spending their time, building, whether you want to call it transformations to really go sort of power, the sort of upstream, downstream of this would be, moving from like source data systems to eventually being something which is consumed by BI or, other, or becomes really the foundation of, reverse ETL, BI, analytics, machine learning, that in between of going from source systems to a model layer, which is then used by everything else. That in between is what I call analytics engineering. Is
Plus,
that
I would bring in the business acumen too of being able to influence people in the
Yeah.
business with data, right? So so really the data analyst role plus some data modeling in SQL, right? Like enough data modeling skill to like do some damage. Usually it's like from not so great to decent, on data modeling, maybe a little stronger than that. But
is
yeah.
an analytics engineer even meant to do analysis work? Like,
I
is
thought
that
It depends on the size of the team. I feel
Yeah.
like at WeWork, I've seen analytics engineer do a little bit of data modeling, but a lot of dashboarding work. But that completely depends on the day and, like David said, time of the month. Yeah, I think it's a mix. That's why I asked, like, what is an analytics engineer? I wanted to add that at least from what I've seen at WeWork, um, the the importance of data modeling. I feel like data modeling usually, I don't know, it's not the most glamorous part of data engineering or data science, but it is, I would say, it is very foundational and fundamental to building good data platform. From what I've seen, as much as I would like to automate the data modeling part, the reality is that um, every company, they have some upstream system that's a SaaS product, like say Salesforce or Mixpanel or any other tool with a very standard data model. But they also have like internal applications that is very specific to the company or to the business, which has its own complicated data model. And as much as I would like to see a horizontal connection between all of these different systems, I would say that's still pretty far in terms of actually achieving it. Like we still need to do a lot of work understanding how the data flows between different systems, how to connect it, and how to translate all of that into the core business concepts that everybody else in the organization uses. So data transformation is important, and I think the skill, you will probably require this skill, at least for some time, we aren't there yet where the data transformation piece is fully automated. But if that is automated, then I think, Tarush, to your point, is this role even important? I think that's when that question becomes really important as well.
I think, yeah,
David.
data modeling is definitely very, very important. And like I feel like we're all coming back to it, having like ignored it for too long. And I feel like the more we look at it, the more it kind of pushes upstream into the data engineer's workflow rather than allowing, or not allowing, but relying on the analytics engineer to kind of fix the data model after the data's kind of landed. It would be better if the data engineer was part of the PRD process, product design process, where they're thinking about the data model up front with the product change, and the data model is therefore there, and it's not having to be re-engineered afterwards. It kind of it's just there for the analytics engineer to do what they need to afterwards with. And I think that then can result in like less need for a huge amount of analytics engineering, a huge amount of DBT models, because the data coming in is already in a decent structure to use.
You know,
Yeah.
what I find really interesting is, sorry, Max, after you.
Yeah, I was gonna say like sometimes like if you really kind of categorize, you know, but data engineer, the analyst engineers, sometimes the difference maybe between them, both of them do, you know, write SQL and build data models, but maybe the time horizon of the data engineer's model is like, you know, 5 or 10 years. Like these models are foundational, maybe the core models for the business. And in some cases, the analyst engineer is more the flavor of the week, the flavor of the month, like the new product that we're launching and tracking. Though, do we really need to have, you know, two kind of time horizon and two areas of focus? Probably not, right? I think like we're pointing towards the generalists, like we should probably do these things once and do it well. But that can be a difference sometimes.
Yeah, I find it really interesting because we like, you know, something which, to be honest, I thought was actually quite straightforward. I hadn't even thought about like what is the nuance of even an analytics engineer. Like this came from like the DBT world, right? That's where the name sort of came from. And you know, the four of us couldn't really have a consistent definition of what this is. Like, is this involving analyst work? And is this not analyst work? And are they doing some BI? And like, are they not doing BI? And we've seen that same overlap with, hey, what is a data engineer? Because they're building models and an analytics engineer is models. Isn't, I mean, this sounds like it's all actually all the same thing. Like, you know, data engineers are definitely doing analytics engineers work. Analytics engineers have a part of analyst works as well as BI engineering work. Like, I mean, it sounds like, you know, it's all actually the same thing even today. We just sort of call it different names, but fundamentally it's someone who is taking data from source systems, modeling it, building BI, and doing some analysis on top of it. Can
Yeah,
we
I
like
think conceptually,
yeah, when I said the time horizon is the difference, does that even make sense to say like, oh, we do the same work, but my time horizon is shorter, therefore it should be different title? No, it doesn't make like no, right,
I
right.
think essentially, if you're on the core data team, you're called a data engineer. But if you move over to like one of the, you know, if you move over to one of the teams, one of the sort of vertical teams, which have, you know, one of the product teams, and you become a data engineer over there, your sort of title changes to analytics engineer because now it's no longer the big model, which is central. It's the small model, which is more the weekly. But what changed in like your skill set?
so I think I also think it's so I was in a position like the last time I was looking after a data team where I had analysts, I had analytics engineers, I had data engineers, and like the way I delineated them was like where are you operating? Obviously, everyone is still working on the same. They're working on the same like production workflow, right? It's still, but it's a case of where. So like I typically say anything like up to landing, you know, decent but raw data in the data lake, that's data engineer. Anything from there up to like exposing it in the semantic layer is the analytics engineer. Anything after that is the analyst. Like that's like loosely how I delineate the roles, and that's how I'd hire them and have the job descriptions.
That makes sense, but you think from a skill perspective, from a skill set perspective, is there any difference in all three
Yeah.
of them? Like, is your analyst, are you testing them way more on like, here's the data set and go analyze it? And hypothetically, even if from a testing perspective you're doing it, like hypothetically, if you gave your data engineering team, which is the very first part of your funnel, if you gave them that same problem as you're giving the folks who are analyzing post-semantic layer, what I'm wondering is, would they actually be pretty good at solving that same, would they have the same skill set to basically be pretty effective in that as well? Like, if this was a double blind test, like, would your analysts actually be better at analyzing data?
So yeah, I believe so. And part of that isn't because of technical skill, right? Part of that is because those analysts are much more like stakeholder driven and used to doing requirements gathering much more so than maybe, especially if you go very far to the left, like to the data engineer. And then the analytics engineers are like somewhere in the middle where they do think about the things that stakeholders are feeding into the analysts and into themselves, but they're thinking about it at a much like a higher level, trying to build scalable things which can solve many different use cases at once. And then the data engineers, I feel like they were split between doing what you'd now call like maybe data platform engineering, much more like that kind of workflow where they're keeping stuff up and building infrastructure. But then you've got other ones who are involved in like that product engineering process where they're building the new like data models that are part of the new products, and then making sure that data flows downstream. So I think like skills wise, they are quite different because like those data engineers, especially if you compare the data engineer and the analyst, their skill sets are incredibly different. I wouldn't expect like an analyst to be able to do a data engineer's role, like in that context. Analytics engineers could probably like span a bit of both.
Yeah, makes sense.
I was gonna add to that. So data platform engineers, like David said, also interface a lot with the upstream product development teams, whereas data analyst is definitely more, business user or stakeholder facing. But in the context of WeWork's organization and reorganization and all the changes that has happened, data engineers on a team have had to take on the role of data analysts, where we have started looking at metrics as a product. And when you start thinking about data as metrics, we would need to, we would need to start talking to business stakeholders more often, because most of the metric definition is being defined by the stakeholder. So I'd say that in very stable organizations, maybe there is a very clear delineation between data engineer / data platform engineer and data analyst. But I feel like as more and more of the stacks getting automated, with metrics becoming pretty important, or the semantic layer becoming pretty important, where a stakeholder can just go in, log into a tool, pick a metric, and just say, hey, just slice and dice this metric for me. In that case, I'd say the role of an analyst and the role of an engineer kind of blends.
Yeah, I think role blending, I think is a great theme too. So talking about the analytics tool chain, which is like to take these raw assets from the source systems, and landing in data warehouse, transforming the data, doing a bunch of data modeling, and then finally like serving either some actual data to people or a place for people to self-serve. Like this whole tool chain, the more roles you have, the more friction you introduce, and the more like reactive you become as opposed to proactive. And that's really that kind of makes it hard to deliver value. So I would urge people to be autonomous, like learn everything you need to know across the layers so that you can go and have a direct impact, and you don't depend on a data engineer, an analyst engineer, or a dashboard builder to deliver value. I think it makes a lot of sense to just be able to do it all on your own. And what skill set are needed? Maybe a little bit of SQL, a little bit of data modeling, a little bit of like that drag and drop in a dashboarding tool, and then you can you don't have to like coordinate with a bunch of people to deliver just a little bit of value.
Guys, I would love to continue this. Like, unfortunately, this talk was only half an hour. but I know we're going to be over late, but I do want to ask you one kind of question, and it's kind of like a very simple yes or no question as we kind of wrap the session up. You know, if you had a job description of a data engineer, a data scientist, analytics engineer, and you were hiring for these roles, and you happen to have someone who had a generalist skill set, right? Like applying, as a data generalist, would you would you would you be as open to this person actually interviewing for this, or would you think like a generalist skill set across a few different areas would actually hold him or her back from being a sort of qualified candidate for any one of those sort of special roles? What I'm saying is, like, would a generalist applying, who's done a little bit of data engineering, done a little bit of analyst, done a little bit of this, would you look down upon them if they hypothetically were applying for an analyst role or a core data engineering role?
I mean, no, certainly not. I quite appreciate the fact that they can do a few different things, and I think the generalism actually compensates for the lack of specialism. Like the generalism from a different area compensates for the lack of specialism in one area. I think they kind of make quite good analytics engineers, I found, because the analytics engineer kind of sits in the middle. Those generalists do quite well there. So that's usually like my leaning.
Awesome.
I'm inclined to say it depends on the nature of the company. Like for example, at Preset Max, I'm assuming that you have experts who are, who know orchestration in and out. So in those cases, I think having very specialized engineer would probably help. But in a place like WeWork, where we make use of all of these tools to build a data platform, I would definitely lean towards hiring a generalist, because that's exactly what we want right now, an engineer who can do multiple things.
I would say same on my side too. I would go towards a generalist too, especially at a startup where we have like very, very small data teams. We need to have people that can move across the different layers of the stack. So definitely the smaller the company, I would say the more we need generalists. I'm surprised to hear that in larger environments, you'd also go for a generalist, which was great to hear too.
I know we're out of time. It was really cool to actually see everyone talk about, conclude in one direction, because usually these talks are a bunch of amazing opinions and like, a lot of room for thought. But I kind of liked how this one ended. So really, really appreciate everyone's time. Thank you so much for being here. And to our listeners, if you have any questions, we'll be around for a few minutes. Feel free to message us on the chat boards, and hope this was insightful